Hello, welcome back to AI Ramblings. Neal, I'll give you the honors of telling everyone what our episode number is because
Yeah,
we've come a long way.
episode 28. 28 down. Yeah.
We are progressing slowly, and yesterday was a big night, regardless of which side people are on the political spectrum. There was a big election, and I think from a technology, AI perspective, it kind of touches on some of the topics that we've been talking about on the show here, specifically around the headwinds of trade and tariff issues that are confronting the broader technology industry, the AI industry, especially in terms of global supply chains, the US China tensions, and so on. And why do these elections matter? Well, it looks like across the board, in whether it's the mayor race in New York or the races in Virginia and New Jersey and the other issues around the country, the core issues going into the midterms this November seem to be affordability. And we've talked about this, that from my perspective, Moore's law, watching technology waves over the last 30 years, the one constant thing that we've been able to kind of rely on almost like clockwork is that performance of computers and computing devices would basically double every couple of years or so. But very importantly, the prices would come down by 50% or more. And as a result, we've seen this bounty of technology, gadgets, etc., that kind of move that cycle. This year, for the first time, we've seen increases in pricing for everything from smartphones to computers, etc. And why is this important? Because with AI gadgets coming on, we're going to talk about this in some other aspects of our show today. It's very important that the consumers globally are able to upgrade devices, whether they're computers or smartphones, in a more rapid pace than they have been upgrading over the last 5-6 years. Why? Because these devices increasingly have more memory, they have more processors and more GPUs, neural processors, etc., that actually enable a lot of the AI functionality, the new applications, the new services that people are excited about. One of the topics we're going to talk about today is the explosion of small AIs versus large language models. And all of those things require a lot more hardware locally. And for that, we need an upgrade cycle. And for that, we need affordability on these devices at the mainstream level, not just the early adopters and twits like your uncle here who loves getting, one of each gadget out there and play with them, etc. But it's the mainstream application of this. So for all of those reasons, it's important to kind of highlight that from a political point of view, going into this year, affordability is going to be an issue that may get some political attention from both sides. And so that's an important thing to just kind of note. In terms of news of the week, I'll just quickly highlight some of the things that we want to touch on and then talk about their implications for technology, etc. But the big thing last week was obviously most of the Mag 7s reported their earnings. By and large, they were all very good, very strong in their core businesses, whether it was Meta, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, and a whole host of others that are not, quote, the Mag 7 or the Mango companies per se. And all of them were good. So that was, and then we have a lot of detail on all of this. We've written about it. It's in our newsletter, AI Reset to Zero. Please go refer to those for more details. But a couple of big takeaways on that is that Google and Amazon surprised more on the upside. These were the underdogs a couple of years ago. I wrote about them a couple of years ago where people had said that those two were behind in the AI race versus some of the companies like Microsoft, etc. And these two companies, I think, kind of turned a corner with investors this quarter, where they kind of made clear the case that both companies are actually ahead of the game, or at least with the AI game in terms of deploying AI at a massive level. Google, especially with its vertical stack of Gemini and TPUs, which are their versions of NVIDIA's GPUs across their tech stack, and they're gaining momentum on that. So both stocks were up relative to its peers. And so that was a big important takeaway from all of that. And then I also took occasion in one of my pieces to highlight that Apple is the current underdog. Everyone has written off Apple as being out of the AI game. And I really think that they're just in the process of getting started. And in particular, as we move to AI devices over the next year or two, Apple is the best position amongst the Mag 7 and Mangos in terms of trust and privacy, which is a big issue. And we're going to talk a lot about that at the latter part of this show in terms of lots of AI devices that are coming along. So I just wanted to highlight that one thing from a news item point of view, because it's very easy to kind of get flooded by all the tech news in terms of AI data center caps. And yes, the numbers are massive. All of these companies are going from spending 40, 50, 60 billion a year to 70, 80, 100 billion a year into next year and continuing that, which means that NVIDIA will continue to chalk up the orders because they are the axe and shovel provider in this gold rush. And Jensen literally at his GTC conference in DC put up an amazing chart where he said, and he doesn't typically do this, that over the next few years, meaning 3 or 4 years, they were going to see orders of at least $500 billion. So that's T, not a B, of his chips. So that was a big thing. Now, a lot of that has, of course, been driven with the leadership of OpenAI that just races ahead, executing on all cylinders. I've written a lot about that. And so there are some increasing fears by investors. It's not evidence in the stock prices that say, hey, is OpenAI too big to fail? Meaning, if some of this doesn't come to pass, then all of these companies are going to be impacted. And these companies together are 40+% of the S&P indices. So even if you're a passive investor like you and I in the stock market, we're going to be impacted. And yes, that is true. That is a risk of this. And we've always said here on Reset to Zero that it's very important to keep in mind why we're bullish on a net basis in terms of AI on a bottom-up technology basis. It's going to be very exciting, the kinds of things we're going to be able to do. But there is always a lag factor from the technology we're developing, the people being able to figure out how to make mainstream products at affordable prices for people from that, and then the financial rewards. And the markets sometimes get ahead on the financial piece of it. They get excited and take something that might take 10 years to happen, compress it in the next 3 years, and push up the valuations. And that's what always leads to the talk of bubble, 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 which has been in the air. I personally, and I'm on the record here on the show, we've talked about it, that the bubble concerns are probably a little premature only because everyone's talking about it, because we've learned lessons from the history point of view. And typically bubbles happen when people don't say bubble as much. But it's a strange world and we've got a lot of other things going on geopolitically, etc. So we know there'll be volatility, but we just don't know when. So always be prepared in your approach on that stuff. And that's why on a net basis, we still tend to be more positive than negative. And this also leads into the third news item of the week that I wanted to touch on, which is the fears over job losses have been with us for a long time. You and I have talked about this, and some new data came out that is showing that maybe some of those fears are overdone, maybe premature, that companies are not necessarily doing all these layoffs just for AI related issues, but other issues, etc. And so that is an important piece of data. You and I have talked about it. So those are the three primary news items that I wanted to just touch on, and we should discuss it and then jump into our main topic of the
Yeah.
week. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I think the one where I might be able to add just the biggest flavor and reaction to would be that final one regarding the job loss. I mean, with the Amazon layoffs being kind of the headline news item over the last 2 or 3 weeks, I feel like, which says a lot because there's so much news that comes out nowadays as we cover on the show. I saw within my own network of friends and friends of friends on places like LinkedIn, a lot of people being affected by the layoffs and whatnot, and there being a growing concern. And we discussed this on our past show, but it just shows how cyclical and a lot of the times reactionary a lot of the news is to this. As the Axios piece kind of states, and in a lot of cases, a lot of people who have been laid off at times have been rehired back and at a pretty fast rate. So it just shows that a lot of times that when the news breaks, of course, all these news sites are doing this for clicks and for reactions, but a lot of times it's not covered that these people are being rehired back into the fold and are being integrated in different ways within the same company and same teams a lot of times too. So it just underlines the main fact here is that this stuff is moving fast. There's a lot of noise, and it takes time to kind of pause for a second and look at what's actually going on from an organizational point of view.
No, I think that is spot on. And then the one other thing, there are also some data points on how even the CEOs are getting excited about, too excited about this. And I'm not talking about the tech CEOs here. I'm talking about CEOs in general on the S&P that have been advancing the cause of AI, deploying AI, etc. And there is a delta between their expectations on how fast AI can make a difference in their product sets versus all of their mid and lower level folks that are actually implementing the stuff. And there has been a lot of disconnect, from the top down kind of instructions on expectations on how AI is going to do things and be capable and so on. And then the bottom up feedback that, hey, the AI is cool, but it doesn't do all the things that you think it does, that it will be able to do it once we do integrate it into this and that, but that's going to take more resources, more time, etc., more people, different types of people. So all of this needs to be sorted out. So I think both you said it very eloquently as well, which is when we look at the headlines, just recognize that, don't just take headline A, headline B, draw a line through them and then extrapolate, because job markets are typically very messy things. What we see in the newspapers is typically the tip of the iceberg. The stuff underneath the waves is really what matters, and that takes longer. And so we're kind of directionally optimistic on a net basis, but it's a very messy process in the kitchen in terms of how the sausage gets made. All right, so let's go to our main topic of the week, which we have been talking a lot on on the show on the Reset to Zero. It's not just going to be the large language models, the LLMs. It's also going to be SLMs, small language models, that you're going to see literally dozens, if not hundreds, and I dare say thousands of SLMs, mostly open source, that are going to be put together by customers and so on, and put on local devices to do a lot of useful things, in addition to the big LLMs that are proprietary, from the companies like OpenAI and Anthropic. And all of that will work together. The best example of this, if any of you use Perplexity, that's a good example of a service that uses multiple LLMs. When your query comes in, it just figures out which LLM to or SLM to route it to. Microsoft, Apple are now rolling out devices with lots of small language models. Tim Cook had some commentary on SLMs in underlying Apple Intelligence and Siri and so on. So there was some new data and new work on the SLM side of the equation today, which I thought would be interesting as a main topic of the week. And again, this is something that fundamentally changes the way we've talked about AI over the last couple of years to how we will be thinking about AI over the next 2 or 3 years. And again, there's also a geopolitical element here, because everyone talks about the US versus China race. And I often get, when I go to conferences, well, is US going to win? Is China going to win? And I say, look, everyone's going to move ahead together. It's not a race, because this is a technology, and technologies take years, if not decades, to happen. And more global it is, the better. The Chinese, however, just to make a point, since their DeepSeek success, which was an open source large language model, and then AI agents on top of that, and Gentic, they have very swiftly moved into open source AIs to the point where the majority of the open source language models are now out of China versus the US. Our big open source champion was Meta with Llama, and they're now refiguring out their strategy, hybrid of open and closed. But all of them in China are also moving into small language models as well. So think about it in two axes: the open close thing, and then the business of large to small. And actually, there's gradations. There's even nano models and so on. And what we're generally finding is, because of the innovations across all of this stuff, technically, how to do chain of thought, how to do inference, how to do sparse models that can find data and do distillation, all of these technical terms that come into the equation, we're finding that we can pack in a lot more punch into the smaller models than the larger models, which has huge benefits, because all of a sudden we can come up with application sets that we never imagined. The costs are far lower. You don't need huge, complicated servers. You can do it locally. So the innovation aspect of these smaller models is just going to be mind-boggling. And I dare say most of the companies that are deploying this, they barely know what to do with this. And that's why this story, I keep saying AI tech wave, this feels like people are, I was at the conference that I was a couple of weeks ago. People said, what inning are we in? And I said, are you talking about baseball? What? Yeah. And they said, yeah, 9 innings. I said, well, what's before the first inning? And they said, well, pre-inning kickoff and so on. I said, yeah, that's probably where we are. So when I think about small AIs and technically what's going on in under the hood on all of this stuff with open and closed, oh my God, this feels beginning of the beginning. What do you think, Neil?
Yeah, I
I just
mean,
thought it was a
just
fascinating thing.
from an engineering point of view, and also just like logically thinking through this stuff, it makes sense that where the real power and innovation is going to come is in these proverbial. I mean, however you want to like phrase it, but essentially the way I view it as SLMs are these building blocks, and LLMs are like the whole building itself. I think it's much easier to innovate on a smaller scale and provide value in these building blocks that can be configured around like Lego pieces and build these really powerful workflows for especially for companies, to use. And that's kind of where the piece that you're drawing the topic from focuses on, is that a lot of companies are finding the most use in this area. I think in terms of LLMs, we talk about stuff like AGI and whatnot, and these big leaps and bounds and in science, and how these models are going to be used to kind of provide new discoveries rather than just synthesizing the information that it's been trained on. And I think it follows along with that chain of thought, just to show that, the incremental changes are going to be felt most in SLMs. And that's an area that, as you mentioned, a lot of people maybe aren't as focused on. And in an area I know that you've been writing about for a bit. So it's great to see it being covered a bit more. And it's something that's going to continue to evolve here.
So it's very exciting stuff. I think from a regular mainstream perspective, this just means that keep your mind open, be excited for what's about to happen. Don't jump to any conclusions about what chatbots can do for you, etc. Because as cool as ChatGPT or Claude or any one of these things that you might be using, we have not even seen the cool things that are going to be coming here, and most of it we won't think of it as AI. And that's the other aspect of this I just want to highlight, because if, let's say, in the next couple of years, and we will see this with Apple devices, you will see a lot of functionality that you're going to be impressed with, whether using Apple Messages or Apple Notes or any Apple application, and then third-party applications, because they're enabling that. And Google is trying to do the same thing, Microsoft to a lesser extent as well. But you're going to see a lot of opportunity for millions of developers to build all these things. And so this is going to be just very exciting in terms of how this is going to evolve. Even OpenAI, they had this Sam Altman was sitting with his chief scientist, and they had this chart behind them where they had the technical stack, and they literally had this big point on the top in the application layer where they said there'll be lots of developers creating all these cool application services on top of our chat GPT and GPT platform, which is the typical tech dream. He did not touch on the small models and those kinds of details, but that's what's going to be driving that. Anyway, so I don't want to kick this point to death, but I do want to highlight it because it's not something that's in the mainstream discussion. When we talk about language models and AI, people typically
Exactly.
just think LLMs, and that's why I wanted to introduce this notion of SLMs and just kind of talk about it a little bit. Which brings us to our next areas of discussion, which is our watch or reads of the week. And I'll let you kick off this one because this is one of my favorite topics, and it's
Yeah,
actually ties into my obsession of the week as well. Go ahead.
exactly. So mine is a piece from The Verge written by Jennifer Tui, who's the essentially the chief reviewer of smart homes. She spent some time on the Verge a couple weeks ago thinking about a lot of the AI innovations in the smart home space, which you're going to cover a bit later. Spoiler alert. It's a well written piece in terms of it explaining how AI and Gemini, especially, we at the house here have probably most of the Google offerings in the smart home space. We have the cameras, the doorbell, the thermostat, all the speakers possible, and it's in this era now where you're able to kind of, earlier it felt a bit fragmented, like your camera was one thing, your thermostat was one thing, and these were all separate pieces that really didn't interact with each other than just being on a dashboard together in the app. But it's through these new Gemini features where you're kind of able to get, in the case of this review, daily summaries, and you're able to prompt and kind of ask what happened today in front of my camera, how was the temperature at the house. But it also highlights a bit of the hallucination side of things, in which there were several instances where the camera misidentified things like animals, but even there was a case in which a weapon was identified in the space of a gardening tool. So once again, as we kind of underline with all these things, it's an area that's going to continue to evolve. This very, very, very early days, and To be completely honest, most people probably won't even know or care that Gemini is being added in, and that's also something that's kind of brought up in the article in terms of does AI really even belong in this space? Is this an area in home automation where we need AI and technology? And that's another area where we've spent some time discussing. I brought it up last week with the idea of the smart bed that went down during the AWS outage, and the whole question of do dumb things really need to be made smart in the home? But it's an interesting piece from that perspective. I encourage everyone to check it out because it's an area that we've kind of focused on a bit, and we'll continue to track.
I think it's a terrific piece. I would wholeheartedly ask people to read this and also track Jennifer Toohey, who she has for a bunch of years tracked all this home automation stuff, and it's very early days, and it does tie to my obsession of the week as well. So let me come back to that in a couple of minutes after we finish my read of the week, and we'll finish up on this topic of home AI gadgets, which is a very key piece of where we're going in the next couple of years. And so my read of the week, this is a teeny bit less technology, but Scott Galloway, who's a fellow I've known for a long time, he's a professor of marketing at NYU. He's been a technology entrepreneur for a bunch of years. He's built companies, sold companies, and very well, he's an author of a bunch of books. He just came out with a new book, Notes on Being a Man. He's been doing a lot of great work on identifying some of the issues with younger men today in our Gen Z generation. Some of the social elements, not just the impact of technology on young people, which you and I have talked a lot about on the show. Men and women have unique aspects of how social media, Facebook, Instagram, doom scrolling on these devices. What has this done to younger minds in terms of their ability to focus, attention, desire to read books versus shorter items, those kinds of very tactical issues. But he takes some of the broader pictures of that he identifies a bunch of statistical data, and we have summary reviews of this, which kind of summarize this if you don't want to read the book. And he just launched the book. It's a New York Times bestseller. He's been on a lot of talk shows, so you can watch some of the YouTube videos, etc. He's very eloquent, but it's a message worth internalizing a little bit in terms of the impact on young men. In this case, he also talks about young women as well, but less. It's this one is focused on young men, and it's important, obviously, in the context of technology and AI, because this is the generation that's going to be deploying a lot of this stuff and going to be impacting a lot of the things that we talk about on this show. And so I wanted to highlight that as an important new read of the week. I've just started it. I've gone through maybe a third of it so far, so I haven't finished it. Still on my to-do list, but it's definitely worth. But I've been tracking Scott for a very long time, and I think this was an interesting highlight. So that takes us to our obsession of the week, Neal, and your obsession of the week, and then my obsession of the week. Again, it ties to this AI device thing. So why don't I let you go take the ball, and then
Sure.
I'll come and bring up the rear.
Yeah, so mine is on a topic we discussed a couple episodes ago. It was in the news a lot and just kind of died down, also due to just kind of the poor press it received. But it's a piece from the New York Times about the Friend AI necklace that kind of went viral, a campaign taken out in the New York subway about it, and there was a lot of backlash about the way it was portrayed. But the piece does a really good job of kind of touching on what we discussed as well, where I don't think the AI is the problem with these devices. It's more or less the way that they're made and the way that they're perceived amongst people. I think there's a really big social engineering part that really hasn't been tackled yet successfully. We discussed Johnny Ive and OpenAI's collaboration. We're kind of waiting to see where that goes. A lot of reports that things have slowed down because of issues like this, where the public perception towards AI assistants and AI friends is pretty negative, not only due to areas like Hollywood and other media through movies like like Her, or even movies like 2001: A Space Odyssey, where we have these like AI assistants that can turn on you or
Open the
replace
pod pay
sentences.
doors, Hal. Okay, I'm
Exactly.
sorry, I had to do that. I had to do that.
Obligatory. But yeah, it's something we've discussed where Hollywood media has kind of played this role in portraying AI in this doomerist fashion, which may not be all wrong, but I think it's also important to consider that there is somewhat of a positive to these things, but it needs to be deployed in a way that is socially acceptable and is done thoughtfully. And I think the piece does a good job of highlighting a bit of that and how things went wrong with this very specific AI pin called Friend. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of add it to that just for furthering some of the convo we've been having around that on the podcast.
The thing is, this is again, all you'll see. There's a common thread to all these topics that we're discussing. And you put your finger on it. Obviously, it's the social engineering aspect of these AI products that's going to be very important. There's huge issues in terms of behavioral impact on people. One of the big issues we've talked about a lot is just AI fundamentally is a technology which is very different than previous tech waves, where humans are predisposed to anthropomorphize these things, to read humanity in these things, which is not correct, and won't be correct for a long time. Even the creators of this technology talk about this stuff in terms of AGI and godlike AI and all that other stuff. And even they're tempering their dialogue on this because they were influenced by the very science fiction shows that we've talked about. And then they started to build the stuff and they got way too excited saying that, oh, what we are building is actually going to lead to HAL, that computer that we're talking about, where, the thing is it's a friend. And we've seen that trope in every science fiction movie. Yes, we may get there, but it's not going to happen in a few years. It's going to take decades. Your kids or grandkids are the ones who are going to have to deal with these issues and actually reap the benefits, because that's what's going to bring the benefits in as well. In the meantime, these are great tools. They're going to augment us, they're going to help us, etc. So yeah, AI pins, I've got 3 of those over there, and I use them all around in terms of when I have permission to use in meetings, but they're still nowhere near together as products. And what happens is these companies tend to create these products. There's huge venture capital pressure to create revenues and so on. So they'll immediately start putting subscription tiers, and they'll offer these bells and whistles that take away from the core mission of improving the core product. And there's a lot of these kinds of issues. These products are going to be trying to find their direction in the marketplace, mainstream marketplace, from a technology point of view and a business model point of view, and then the behavioral engineering part of this as well, which ties into my obsession of the week, because this ties to your read of the week, which is the home automation. I'm a nut about home automation stuff. You and I, we've talked about all the gadgets that you talked about at your mom and dad's home, and then the stuff I have around here. I love cameras and I love all of this stuff everywhere, etc. The problem is that they barely work. And my obsession of the week, I just wanted to, you mentioned Jennifer Toohey of The Verge. She, along with David Pierce, who's the senior editor of The Verge, they did a Vergecast, which I would encourage everyone to find a little time to watch together, because they talk about the home automation thing, which Neal talked about just a few minutes ago. And it's a very broad but deep conversation on the behavioral engineering parts of these things, of home automation and the expectation set, etc. And it's very well discussed as kind of the lay of the land in today's home automation, whether it's things that turn on and off your lights and turn up the music when you come in and recognize things and do all these wonderful things. But they're very complex things right now and very expensive at the high end to do. The mainstream do-it-yourself version of these things barely do the things, and the AI, like Gemini, is just being rolled out. Amazon just rolled out Alexa Plus, the 8 Plus. I'm saying it softly because I don't want to activate it in people's homes. But there is an LLM version of this that's being rolled out. Next year, we'll see a similar thing from Siri, from Apple, with their Siri 2 product, etc. So this business of home automation, social engineering, behavioral engineering, AI pendants, all of this, and Johnny Ive and OpenAI's product in terms of devices, which is supposed to be some sort of a pendant or a mobile thing, etc. All this is in the same stew. It's all in the same stew. And it's all going to be an ongoing topic, which is why we're talking about it on episode number 28 today, because we're probably going to be talking about it in a lot more detail in episode 52 and beyond. So that is, this, as you can see, it's an obsession of the week. It's my obsession. It's your obsession. So that's why we talk about it. And we'll have a lot of things in the show notes that if you guys want to dive in deeper on this, there's a lot of material you can sift through and internalize. So with that, I think we're at the end of our show and time for burning questions, Neal. And
Yeah.
my burning question to you is, again, glass half full. You've been the IT engineer for your home. What is your favorite AI home automation service or
Yeah.
device, that you actually have found useful?
Yeah, I think for us it has to be the doorbell. That's an area that, now that we've had it for a couple of years, we can't really imagine not having it. I was just having this conversation with mom the other day, but the fact that we're not home a lot of the time and either packages are getting delivered or people are coming to the house or, in several cases, the amount of value it provides by just being able to recognize that someone has come to the door, has a package, has dropped something off, the fact that you can speak to the person if you're not there, something that's so trivial now that you have it and you kind of use it without thinking. But I think that's the thing that's probably provided the most value to us at home. And hopefully it'll be an area where AI is added in a bit more thoughtfully, other than just being able to ask how many times the dog went across your lawn. I'm sure they'll find better use cases than that, and it's something that I hope to see improved.
I love it. I think that's a good one to start. And your burning question for me.
Yes. So once again, on the smart home tear that we've been on, is there any device that you have, appliance, accessory that isn't smart right now, but you would like to be smart?
That's a great question. I'm going to take opportunity of this question to answer it with my favorite version of this question, which is there any smart, so-called smart device that I wish were smarter? And you've heard
Yeah.
me address this one, so you know what's coming. Look, all of these devices that AG, AA, AS, you know the companies I'm talking about. Whenever I say any of those words in this place and your place, basically six devices just all try to answer. And the engineers of these mega companies with all their multi-trillion dollars market caps have not figured out how to make sure only that one of the devices answers, not all of them. And it typically should be the device that's closest to the person who's talking. It's like, a human being in a room of other human. And when they make a request, they usually say a name, and the other human in a crowd of six humans, particularly who it's being referred to, then answers. And right now we have everyone thinking it's their name and their answer. This is a fundamental social engineering, behavioral engineering, whatever you want to call it, problem. And it's a bloody mess. So please, I want these things to be smarter before you add any large language model, small language model, no language model, whatever it is. Just fix that issue. So number one, please make it smarter on that front. And then the broader issue of what device I would like to be smart, I'm going to answer it again in a different way, because one thing I'm very afraid of right now with all these devices that we're talking about is that they're all increasingly siloed. So you talked about home, issue, and this will come up if you guys actually, watch some of or read some of the material we put up on the show notes on home automation. All of these companies, Amazon, Google, etc., they want you to be in an Apple. They want you to be in their vertical silo of devices. And those things barely talk to each other. So the smartness that I want is the ability for these devices to talk across the silos, so that my Google Home doorbell should be able to talk to my Amazon doorbell and be able to share information. But technically, there are lots of protocols to do this with things like Matter and all these other joint industry protocols. But it's basically industry competitiveness and pettiness in many cases that prevents that. So the kinds of things I want these devices to be smarter on that basis is the interoperability of these devices, because no mainstream home, just give up the ghost, people. And I'm talking to you, CEOs of these companies. Your company is not going to have 100% of all the home automation devices in any given household in America or the world. So the one company that races across for the interoperability across this wins. I've seen this over 35 years of watching and picking technology winners and advising them and helping them. And that is the big opportunity. And if one of you can pick up the ball and run with it, and most of the others will play catch up when you do it. So that is my answer to your question on the smart devices. They need
Great.
to get smarter talking to each other. So
I
thank
agree.
you for joining us for episode 28. Thank you, Neal,
Of course.
for helping put all this stuff together. As usual, if you have thoughts, comments, questions, please ping us. We're wide open. And as usual, if you like this, please like and subscribe. It helps us. It helps the algorithms feed this into lots of other feeds. So it would be appreciated. And as usual, stay tuned. And thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks. See you next time.